Hi everyone, it's Plastic EP here from Melbourne, Australia. And I just want to say, how are you today, Jude?
I am wonderful. How are you?
Going really well, going really well. Now, I don't know if you know, but I'm going to show you something here on the screen and show everyone else out there. Coming up on the 10th of July in the US, I'll be screening my birthday show, Plastic EP's birthday party, and that should be really a buzz. I don't know if you've seen that on the net, Jude.
I have, and I just want to say now I'm looking forward to the 9th of July. I think is the 9th your real birthday or the 10th? Which day is really your birthday?
The 9th is my real birthday, and hopefully I'll do an interview on my birthday. It won't worry me as well. I'll fit that in. And then what I'll do is I'll enjoy the 9th, and on the 10th in the US, we will be showing the show, and I've already got a lot of people now sending in interviews like birthday wishes and people performing and doing good things. And I'll put the show together before that date, and I'll just get you to say happy birthday to me now, and I'll include that in the show. How great's that?
Absolutely. I hope that you have a wonderful year ahead, many blessings, good health, happy memories, lots of Beatles and Monkees music, because I know you love the Monkees as well, and that you are a daydream believer as 2020, 2021 plays out. Happy birthday.
Thank you so much, Jude. And I got to say, it's just a pleasure talking to you about the Beatles. I look forward to this weekly, and it's just like fascinating what you learn. Like, I learned so much by you. I just sit here and it goes in my ears, and it's in so much detail. It's unbelievable.
It's a lot of research, I know you and I were just talking before we went live about volume 4, which is the only volume in the John Lennon series which is still in print. All of the books are available on every ebook format, whether you have Nook or Kindle or whatever ebook format people have in different countries worldwide. But this is the only one, and this is the size of it, that is left in print version. And this is Should Have Known Better, which is volume 4. It is about 1,000 pages just on 1964, just 1964. So you are getting, there are about 4,000 footnotes in the book, and you're getting exactly what the Beatles did, said, wore, ate, sang, and experienced in 1964, which was the year of Beatlemania, obviously. They're making A Hard Day's Night. They're going on their first world tour. They release A Hard Day's Night at the London premiere and the Liverpool premiere. They go on their gigantic, never-ending, almost North American tour. And then they come home, make Beatles for Sale, go on their fall, their autumn UK tour, which they did every year traditionally, release their Christmas special, their Christmas record for the fans, and then do another Beatles Christmas show in London. It is an unbelievable year. And on top of that, John Lennon publishes a book and buys a new house and moves into it, renovates it. Just moving into a new house and renovating a house alone buries most people. He also published a book and was part of the Beatles. So it is a busy book and a busy year. There's a lot going on, lots of information.
Now, Jude, I've got to ask you where they get the book from now. Volume 4, where is it available?
JohnLennonSeries.com. So that's JohnLennonSeries.com or thefest.com, which is the Fest for Beatles fans, which is, you know, our home. All Beatles fans call the Fest for Beatles fans home, and also, of course, on Amazon and wherever books are sold. So
fantastic. Now, in the volume 5, everyone's looking forward to it, even for me. My complimentary copy, that should be out in about a year and a half.
It's winging its way to you. My husband was so sweet. He put on his mask and gloves and braved coronavirus and went to the post office this week, and it is winging its way to you right now. And I want to send out a happy Father's Day to him as well. Rand Kessler, happy Father's Day. And to my adopted dad, Mark Lapidos, who has been a real father to me, and I appreciate all that he's done too. So two great dads and a great husband.
That's great. I'd love to interview Mark too.
Oh, you would. He has quite a story. He is going to meet John Lennon and asking John Lennon if he could do the Fest for Beatles fans. You have to have him on your show. He's remarkable.
That's great. Now, I don't know if I've asked you this question, Jude, because I talk to so many people, but this question fascinates me. On the Revolver album, when George starts the Taxman and goes 1, 2, 3, who coughs in the background?
We're going to need to ask Bruce Spicer that, and I'll find out for you. Bruce is the Beatles F-pedia. He knows everything there is to know about the music. I'm a John Lennon expert, and I'm not a Beatles music expert, but I will find out for you by the next time we see each other. And there are probably thousands of people right now screaming the answer because people know everything about the Beatles, but I will know by the next time I talk to you.
Well, they can text in the answer now if they want, and let's see the majority of answers that we do get. So while we're doing the show, Please Please Me, part 2 about the recording of the album. If anybody knows that answer, they can just write it there and we'll see who's going to be right. And we'll find out the real answer of that because that fascinates me. Now, Jude, let's move into 1963 and the recording of Please Please Me, part 2.
We're going to go back to the 11th of February, 1963. And for those who are joining us and didn't see part 1, we're going to catch you up very quickly. We have already covered part of the day. We're midway through the day as we pick up part 2 of this episode. It has been the coldest winter in British history. And the Beatles have been on tour with Helen Shapiro on her tour bus, drafty tour bus. They've been going into movie theaters, cinemas, into dance halls. You know, everybody's been touching those doorknobs with their little bacteria-ridden hands. They've all been coughing and they're sick. And so the Beatles, consequently, are very sick. John Lennon probably had flu. He's running fever about 103. His throat is killing him. He's shivering. His throat's bleeding, as we'll find out as we go into the day today. He's taking Zub's lozenges as if they're candy to try to soothe his throat. And when George Martin and Richard Langham, the second engineer, and Norman Smith, the first engineer, went to lunch, the Beatles did not go. They stayed and worked in the studio. But George Martin said, "What can I bring you back? Do you want something to eat?" And John said, "Bring me some cold milk." So he's drinking cold milk to try to soothe his throat, but they're all sick, all of them. Their work ethic is so unbelievable that they're not going to not do this LP. They're going to do it, and it's going to take them over 12 hours to complete it. But the unbelievable fact is they're doing it while they are very, very, very ill. Of course, the show must go on. So we are in EMI, which people now call Abbey Road. It was never called Abbey Road until the advent of the Abbey Road LP. It was always known as EMI. And they're in Studio 2, which is what they were always in. That's their customary familiar studio. And it's 4:21 in the afternoon. They are about halfway through the day. And we are going to pick it up at 4:21 as they are starting to work on the third original song of the day, which is one that they wrote on the tour bus with Helen Shapiro, John and Paul sitting together. And it is, of course, Misery, the song that they wrote for Helen Shapiro. Now, for those of you who don't know Helen Shapiro, she was a teen star. She had a hit that got to number 3. Her very first song that she ever performed was called Don't Treat Me Like a Child. And she was just 14 years old when she recorded it. If you can imagine, Don't Treat Me Like a Child, of course she was a child. But the person that didn't treat her like a child was John Lennon. He was very kind to her on the tour. He was always helping her when they would cross the street. He sat with her on the bus a lot. He treated her like a big brother. He knew she had a crush on him, big time crush on him. But he always treated her like a big brother. He was very sweet to her, very encouraging of her work. And she then goes on to record 2 songs that go to #1, You Don't Know and Walking Back to Happiness, which both hit #1. So the Beatles are on this tour bus with her, and they've been given 1 day off to record this LP, 1 day. And they come into studio with the song that they wrote for Helen. Now, Helen loved it. She loved Misery. She thought it had a universal theme. Everybody could relate to the feeling that the world's been treating you bad, Misery. And she thought it would be a big hit, but her manager, Norrie Paramore, did not like the song. And so, as they say on their BBC recordings, Misery is now in the laps of the gods and the hands of the Beatles. And George Martin listens to them run through the song, and he says to them, you know what? I think this song needs a piano solo. He's always adding that little tweak that's going to make it something extra. He said, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to record it at 30 inches per second on the reel-to-reel tape instead of the norm, which is 15 inches per second. And then I will be able to go back after it's recorded, and I'll be able to play the piano and drop in the piano solo into that slot. So it's going to mirror the lead line, and which of course he does later on. So he says, we're not going to fool with that today because #1, they're running out of time. And #2, John is getting sicker and sicker by the moment. So we're going to just have you record the song Misery, and then I'll go back and put the piano in later. So take 1, they begin. The red light comes on. They're downstairs. They're looking up at the booth, the recording booth, where Richard Langham has queued up the tape. Norman Smith has adjusted the levels so that they're ready to record. And George Martin is standing in his crisp white shirt and his tie with his arms folded at the window, watching, looking down on the boys. And they launch in to take 1. It's perfect until the first middle 8. And John sings the second middle 8, where the first middle 8 should go. And they try to make up for it, but it's too late. They've already flubbed it. And they're talking to one another about, Paul is saying, John, you flubbed the words. And John's saying, I know. And they're kind of talking about it when the red light comes on for take 2, and they miss the red light. And they try to jump in, but it's too late. And George Martin blows a whistle over the one MC and says, stop, 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 stop. Let's do it again. Let's start over. Well, just after they do that, George Harrison sort of gets his courage up, and he says, hey, how about if I do that guitar line that I've been working on? And John, who's mad because he's flubbed twice now, says, no, leave it. He doesn't feel good anyway, but he's made 2 mistakes. And so he shuts George Harrison down right away. Well, take 3, again, John messes up. He hits a C chord where he should have hit an F, and he's getting more and more frustrated. And then in take 4, he has never been good with lyrics. I mean, you go back to the Woolton Garden Fete when he and Paul met for the very first time, and he's singing Come Go With Me by the Dell Vikings, and he's singing Come Go With Me Down to the Penitentiary because he doesn't really know the words to Come Go With Me. Yeah, all the way up to the rooftop when he's singing Dig a Pony and does not know the words to Dig a Pony. So he has their production manager, their parts manager at that point, their equipment manager, down in front of him holding a flip chart with the words to Dig a Pony written on it. Well, he flubs the words here again. Instead of saying, I won't see her no more, he says, she won't come back no more. And they stop, and he goes, those damn words. He's really, really frustrated at this point. So by
Jude,
the time that we get to
Jude,
yeah,
I'll just say, we've got so many people tuning in now, and they're all writing notes to you. Even Chachi LaPret, he's written, I love Jude. But then Charles Rosenau's written, I love her more. All right, I have to tell you that.
Well, I love both of them. They have special places in my heart, and they know that. They are that, as I said last time, that Chachi LaPret, of all the famous people that I ever had on my John Lennon Hour radio show. I mean, we have big, people in the Beatles world. The #1 most listened to show was Chachi LaPret's, because why? People adore him. And Charles Rosenau, you go back to Good Day Sunshine and to the early Beatle Fest and back in Kansas City. I mean, he is a staple of the Beatles world. And as I said last week, if you don't take your tour to London and Liverpool with Charles Rosenet, you are missing out, because nobody knows London and Liverpool the way he does. Sweet, both of them. So hello to both of them as well. So we're up to take 5.
Charles, he's got the big Lennon 80 event happening, and people need to get tickets and go and see that event for John's birthday in Connecticut. It's on the internet, because that thing is selling out, and that's going to be a real major event. And now you want people to get out when they can and see something a little bit different, as I said, whatever rules they got going now with in the States there. But I think that event will be such a big event, that Lennon 80.
It will be. And John really deserves the celebration. For me, until we get a vaccine of some sort for the coronavirus, I have 2 autoimmune diseases. I'm not going to be able to get out in the public. But for those of you who can go and enjoy life, plastic, you think back 3 months ago, we had no idea that all of the freedoms that we had would be taken away, and that we would be locked inside a house, afraid to go out. If you are well and healthy and you can go out in the public, you go and enjoy and celebrate every moment, because you never know when things can change on a dime. You're going to be sorry if you don't go to these events. Get out there and go. So, yeah,
exactly,
definitely.
But I tell you what I do here in Australia, Breakfast of the Beatles, I listen to it on a Sunday night at midnight, because I get it through the fantastic app that they got going here. I downloaded it, and I'm listening to 2 hours of Beatles every Sunday night. Believe it or not, it comes in at midnight. So I look forward to that. That's like my weekly ritual, just to hear that Chachi's show on the Sunday night. He's got a show on Saturday night from the page, but I haven't worked out how to do that. So I actually listen to him on the Sunday night, and listening to those 2 hours of Beatles are just fascinating.
It is wonderful. It's uplifting. It's a high point of the week. So I'm glad you get that all the way in Australia too. That's great. It's wonderful.
It comes in crystal clear. Now, before we get back to Please Please Me Part 2, I just want to say hello to Keith, hello to Emily, hello to Roxanne, hello to Laurie, because they're listening to us and watching us, and they're writing texts, which I think is great. So we'll let you continue on with the story, Jude.
So John, at this point, is really frustrated because he's had the wrong chord, he's had the wrong words, and he is just as uptight as he can possibly be. So when take 5 starts, he's concentrating, and he's saying the words over and over to himself, kind of muttering them. And how do I know all of this, by the way? I stand on the shoulders of giants. I was going to see if I could show you the book. Here it is. This is, of course, Mark Lewison's Complete Beatles Chronicle, and his recording sessions are invaluable. What can you say? Mark Lewison has done his homework. But this is another great book called Way Beyond Compare by John C. Wynne. John C. Wynne went to the trouble of taking the EMI transcripts from the studio and writing them all down for us so that we could have word by word what the Beatles said when they were in studio. So everything they're saying here, they really said. And thank you, John C. Wynne. I never would have any dialogue if it weren't for the tremendous work that he did. So John C. Wynne tells us that John is muttering to himself over and over the words to the song as they get ready to do take 5. And he's getting them right, but Paul this time hits an F chord instead of a C chord. And over the microphone, George Martin says, "Wrong bass notes," and the recording stops. John still saying to himself, "I won't see her no more. I won't see her no more. I won't see her no more," trying to get those words right. And Martin could see that the boys had reached a point of diminishing returns. They were tense. They were nervous. They didn't take a lunch break. They were getting it wrong because they were really uptight. And so he makes them take a few minutes to breathe. And this is what happened while they're taking that breather. "We can do this, you know." John was still their cheerleader. "Right," Neil Aspinall smiled. "You're the fabulous Beatles, aren't you?" "Ah, it's not as bad as the Kaiser, Keller," Ringo chuckled. Yeah, well, I give Neil's right arm to be back in the Kaiser Keller right now. John always wore rose-colored glasses. Everything looked better to him in retrospect. Come on, John. It was filthy in there. Paul was right. It was rank and full of rats. We used French letters for light. And we didn't have tea there, did we, George says, or lemon. Yeah, right, John interrupted, but we had leather kecks and beer and prellies and girls and misery. Take 6, Norman Smith suggested, and the boys scurried back to their places as the red light gleamed. So they go back to work and take 6 because they've had a chance to think back to the Kaiser Keller, to the old days, to reminisce and to take a break. Take 6 is absolutely perfect. George decided that without asking permission, he would slip in that guitar riff that he wanted to do. And Ringo decided he would do a little something special on the drums that he's been wanting to do. And at the end of take 6, John says, I'm not particularly thrilled with that. And George says, my riff or the drums? And John says, both. And Paul says, right, I agree with John. So they do take 7. George drops out his little special bit he wants to do. Ringo goes back to standard drums, and take 7 is flawless. George Martin asked them to do it a couple more times for good measure, but pretty much they are set at that point, and they're good to go. It's 6 p.m. at this point, and they only have 4 hours and 45 minutes left, and they've got lots of work to do, so they move on. They're back to chatting again like friends, though. They've kind of broken the ice, and they're a little bit friendlier with each other and not so uptight. And they're talking about the fact that the upcoming LP has to be done today because their schedule for the next 2 weeks is unstoppable. They have at least 2 gigs every single day. And a taping of Thank Your Lucky Stars coming up. They've got so much to do. They have to complete it. They're also talking about a new addition to Brian's staff, a young man who grew up in Liverpool and has since moved to London. And he is going to be writing the liner notes for this new Please Please Me LP. And I think that most of our listeners out there know who that is. They're probably all shouting.
Can I say who that is?
Yes. Yes.
His surname is with a B.
You got it.
Barrow.
Say it.
His surname's Barrow, isn't it?
Tony Barrow, who used to write for the Liverpool Evening Echo. He used to write the Disker column for the Liverpool Evening Echo, and then moved down to London. And Brian likes him and has invited him to write the liner notes. Now, of course, we know he's going to become the Beatles' press agent, and he is going to be very involved in their North American tour in 1964. He's going to plan all of the gigs for them and get the word out to the press and deal with the press. Very difficult job. But at this time, he's just been hired to do those liner notes. And Paul uses this as an opportunity to say to all of them, you know, he moved from Liverpool down to London, and you're going to have to face it. We're going to have to move down there too. That's where we're doing all our recording. That's where all the action is. That's where the business is. I know you guys want to stay in Liverpool, but we're going to have to move to the smoke. That's what they call it, the smoke. We're going to have to move down to the smoke. Paul's ready to go. He's ready to go. John is the least excited about the move. And he says to them, Mimi's going to have 5 cats if I move down to London. And to which Paul says she has 5 cats already. And she did. She actually did have 5 feline friends. So they're already mulling over this idea that they're going to have to go to Liverpool. At this point, EMI has someone come in and they bring the Beatles a tray of hot tea. But for John, they bring a glass of cold milk, and he begins to swig it down. And they look into the glass, and the glass has turned a pink color. And Ringo, who's had lots of experience with hospitals and illness and sanitarium, says to John, your throat's bleeding. Now, think about this. It's only 6 p.m., and they've got to go for several more hours. His throat is bleeding, but they've got to push on. They've got to push on. George shouts up to George Martin and says, hey, up there, is it sounding like a live performance from down here? which is what they wanted to do. Initially, they wanted to record this LP at the Cavern Club, but because it was so dank and wet, it wasn't good for recording. They're trying to make it sound like a live recording. And George Martin says to them, it is, but let me come down there and talk to you about it. So let me read you a little bit about what he had to say. The tall, lean producer traipsed down the stairs with the agility and polish and confidence of a much younger man. His starched white shirt had hardly wrinkled from the day's work, and his thin silk tie was tight and pristine. Slightly greased back, the European sweep made Martin look a lot older than he was, but his boyish smile gave a gentle visage to his face. John watched the tall Londoner approach, thinking that in some ways, George Martin reminded him of good old Uncle George. They had the same thin face, the same wide forehead, the same fatherly manner, the same love of music. They were both men you could trust, men of integrity, men of kindness. Martin stood before the band now and smiled. In answer to your question, George, it sounds very much live up there. The occasional whoop that you boys have been throwing in and the few blips that we've been keeping in the recordings, the sound we're getting is authentic, on the scene. It's going to be a great LP. So they are making it sound like a live performance. Ringo says to George Martin that he's worried that his bass drum can't be heard because he's positioned back from the group. And George Martin assures Ringo that Norman Smith, their first engineer, knows exactly what he's doing with musical recording. And if there were any problem with the bass drum not showing up, he would have immediately alerted them. So they're good to go. So at 7:22, they tell him that they're ready to move on and start recording again. And George Martin says to them, if you don't mind, I know you guys are work, but we're tired up there. It's almost 7:30. We've been going since we got back from lunch. We're going to have to take a break. If you don't want to take a break, that's fine. But up in the booth, we're going to take a break. And so they do. And they take a break. And at 7:30, with 3 hours and 15 minutes to go in the workday, the booth is ready to go again, and Hold Me Tight is up next. Now, Hold Me Tight was not a song that was ready to be recorded. It was in a very embryonic, immature stage, but Paul insisted on recording it because John was owning this LP. John had originally sung and helped to write Love Me Do, and only at the last minute was Paul recruited to sing it. John had written and he sang Please Please Me. He sang Ask Me Why. He wrote Do You Want to Know a Secret? He sang There's a Place. So Paul says he's going to get in there with Hold Me Tight. He wants his fair share of the record, but it is something that's definitely not ready to record. Take one, John and Paul are singing in that beautiful tight harmony that only they can do, that makes them sound as one. But when Paul goes off on his solo line, let me be the only one, already the percussion, the drums and the bass are behind a beat. So George Martin calls a halt to it and they start over again. At that point, there's a little bit of interruption in the action of the recording because Brian Epstein, their manager, and Dick James, their music publisher, arrive and they say hello to the boys. They go upstairs and they are up in the booth with George Martin and Richard Langham and Norman Smith, and they're looking and watching as the boys perform. So there's about a 10-minute interruption as all that happens, but take two finally starts up again. And as soon as they start it, it comes apart. Number one, the song isn't ready. Number two, they got a lot of people watching them now. They're a little bit nervous as everybody is sitting there scrutinizing their every move. Well, Plastic, 14 takes later, they admit the song isn't ready. They're just not ready to record it. And so at 8:25, they call a halt to it and they decide that they're going to move on to something else. And they're going to move on to a song that in John Lennon's catalog is very, very important. It is not an original song. It's a cover song. It's a song written by an artist from Alabama in the United States. His name is Arthur Alexander. And the name of the song, of course, is, are people out there guessing? It's Anna. Anna. And it is a song that's always reminded John of his mother, Julia. And we talked last time about the fact that Julia had relinquished John to her sister and her brother-in-law to rear when he was about 4.5 years old. She had gone to get him from the seaside where his father, Fred, was going to take him away to New Zealand to live, father and son forever. She went to get him. She brought him back to Liverpool, and she took him to her sister's house and told him to go in the backyard and play with his little dog, Sally. And John turned around and said to her, "You're not going to leave me, are you, while I'm gone?" And she, of course, said no, she wasn't. But as soon as he was in the backyard, she did. She left him, and she left him with his aunt and uncle to be raised by them. And John forever wanted to know why she had walked away. She was in love with another man named John Dykins. Her family, especially her father, Pop Stanley, felt it was immoral for her to be living in sin, as they called it back in the day, with John Dykins. But she proceeded to have 2 children, 2 daughters with John Dykins. And when John found out that it wasn't children that she didn't like, it was him that she didn't keep, only him that she didn't keep, his heart was broken. And this song, Anna, really tells how he felt when she walked away with another man that she loved more. So it's going to be very, very difficult for him to sing. And this is what happened at 8:32 p.m. with 2 hours and 13 minutes left to go in the day.
Jude, I just want to say, yeah. Jude, that's written by Arthur Alexander.
Yes,
the song written by Arthur Alexander. I just thought I'd mention that.
Yes, I just said that. Yep, he's gonna be. It's a great song that an Alabama artist, Arthur Alexander, wrote. So he starts singing, "Anna, you come and ask me, girl, to set you free, girl." It was an intensely personal song, a song that took John back. As a child, he never really comprehended the twists and turns of his mother's rocky relationship with his father, Fred, or with John Dykins. He'd never sorted out the complicated love story. The little boy who had inexplicably come to live with his aunt and uncle in Menlove Avenue had no grasp on adult passions and jealousies, animosity, love betrayed, the settling of scores. All John had understood back then was that he'd lost his mom. Julia had chosen someone else. She'd set him free on the doorstep of Mendip's one summer afternoon, and she'd walked away. "You say he loves you more than me, so I will set you free," John sang, "Go with him." Go with him. It was that line that made the song so clearly John's. While American singer Arthur Alexander had scribbled "go to him" on his lyric sheet, implying dismissal of the girl altogether, John had always sung it "go with him," a sorrowful relinquishing, a statement of his permission, sobbing his regret. As he sang, John tilted his head back, closed his eyes, and leaned into the microphone. When each line ended, he shut his mouth completely, lips sealing, his body settling back from the mic. His chin extended, his Roman nose lifted. John was still the little boy who was so often admonished by his Aunt Minnie, "Chin up, John, chin up, be brave." He was the little boy singing himself to sleep in a bedroom miles away from his mother. Behind him now, the doleful, almost dirge-like Anna refrain that George and Paul crooned together was soft, almost reverent. It was the soundtrack of John's memory, a lonely sound, a cry in the dark. And so he sings this song that's really almost too personal for him to sing in front of people. And in fact, George Martin said that it was almost embarrassing to listen to John pour his heart out in this song, Anna. When he gets to the part when he screams, what am I supposed to do? He closed his eyes, and you really are pulled into his heart of darkness. The song was perfect. And when take one ended, no one said anything for a moment. And then from upstairs, you hear George Martin say, nicely done. Now, they did 2 more takes, but they only did it as patches, things that they would put onto the masterpiece, which was take 1. And so very quickly, they've added another song to their recording repertoire. And by 9:12, with 1 hour and 32 minutes to go, they're moving on to a happier, much happier number. It's Ringo time. And Ringo, as we all know, in years to come, is given 1 song on every LP. And of course, this time it's going to be Boys. And, you know, we all know Ringo doesn't have a world-class voice, but what he does have is world-class entertainment. He always poured 100% of himself into every song. He smiled, he beamed with his match 10 hold on those drumsticks. He pounded his heart out, and he made every song something special. Take 1, he's beaming ear to ear when he launches in, when I've been told, when a boy kisses a girl, and he is having a great time. George, who loved this song, is tapping his booted foot as he's playing this Chet Atkins on a Gretsch solo for the bridge. Paul goes, woo, and really whoops it up. And even John, who is in a very somber mood after singing Anna, begins to smile again and begins to be lifted by Ringo. Well, at the end of take 1, George Martin over the speaker says, excellent work, Ringo. And the others are like, what? 1 take? That's it? That's it? But it was exuberant and it was perfect, and they are ready to move on. So now it is time for George Harrison to come back to the mic. In part 1 of the show that we did, we saw George recording a song that John wrote, which was... What was the song, guys? Do you want to know a secret?
No, a secret.
Right?
And George sings that. George sings
George.
that.
And we talked about that in our last show together. But now it's time for him to sing again. And he's back at the microphone with a song that had been a minor hit for Little Eva's group, the Cookies. And it was written a little bit higher so that the girls could record it. And for the Beatles, for George, it was a bit of a stretch because it was pitched a little bit too high for him. But it had great harmony, 3-part harmony between George and Paul and John. It was one of their best. And George's very heavy Scouse accent gave it a real hook, a real flair. Now, I'm not going to tell our listeners, Plastic, what this song is, but I've given them lots of hints just now. So you know it's George Harrison singing. We know it was written by Little Eva's backup group, the Cookies. It's got 3-part harmony, and George's Scouse accent is being highlighted. So the first person who can send us the title is going to win a copy. I have a copy that I found, a secondary copy that someone, it's a used copy, but it's in great shape. It's a first edition of Should Have Been There. Ordinarily, those go for about $150, but I'm going to give it away because it is a used copy in great shape to the first person who can tell us what that song was that they recorded. And you can let me know if somebody types it in, and we'll get their address and send it to them as a prize for watching the show. So now it's 9:45, and they are getting ready to sing John's favorite cover song. It is a song that means a lot to him, as Anna did, because again, this is a song about his mother. You know, growing up in Mendips, John heard his aunt and uncle whisper a lot of things about his mother. The fact that she was flighty, that she was irresponsible, that she should have been taking care of her son better. Once he even heard them say that she was immoral. But it didn't matter what they say. He was going to love her any old way. And the song, of course, was Baby It's You. Every time John sang this brilliant cover song, he thought of her, how much he loved her, how much it didn't matter what anyone said. They could say she was a cheat. They could say that she was not a good mother. It made no difference. He loved her. And when he sang Baby It's You at the microphones of the world, it was always a song for Julia. It took 3 tries for him to get this song right. It's very emotional for him, very difficult for him to sing. But using up the last shred of his voice, he wished he'd recorded it earlier so he could do it justice, but using the last shred of his voice, he got it in the can. And at 10 o'clock, it was done. They had 1 song left to record, 1. And George Martin said, I tell you what, let's all go to the canteen. Let's sit down. Let's have a cup of tea. And we've got to come up with a song that you can record quickly and easily, but it's got to be the best song of the LP. It's got to be a potboiler that makes people want to buy your next album, that they love it so much they can't wait for the next one. It's got to be ringing in their ears. It's got to be fantastic, but it's got to be something you can do, and all of you are tired. So they go to the canteen and they sit down, and Brian Epstein says, well, the boys have their show closer, the one they do every night to close their show. And before he can get the words twist and shout out, George Harrison jumps up from the table, shoves his chair back and says, Johnny can't do that. He's sick. His throat is gone. He's fagged out. He can't do it. And they begin to argue. Paul is saying, well, he can do it. He's got it in him. And George Martin is saying, maybe we can reschedule and we can have you come back and record another time. Brian is saying, we can't come back. We've got 2 engagements tomorrow. We've got the Valentine's dance in West Derby on Thursday. We've got a rescheduled engagement in Birmingham the day after that, and on and on and on and on. There's no time for us to come back. It has to be done tonight. And under all this fighting and arguing and shouting about it, you hear a quiet voice, a tired voice say, I'll do it. They stop. John says it one more time, I'll do it. And so they go back into Studio 2. Now the lights have been turned off in Studio 2. And it takes a while for them to heat up again, like gymnasium lights do. And so they turn them back on, but when they go in to record the last song, the lights are pretty dim. It reminds them of the Cavern Club. It reminds them of the old days back in Hamburg and all those dark, the Kaiser Keller and the Indra and the places they performed. They like the darkness. John pulls off his shirt, drinks some of that cold milk, even though cold milk is the worst possible thing that he could be drinking because it causes mucus to build up in the throat. But it soothes him, and as long as he thinks it works, it works. He steps up to the microphone and he begins to record their Potboiler, the song that's going to close the album. And this is how it went. John strode to his microphone, his RIC 325 high on his chest, his hair plastered against his forehead. He glanced at Paul, who nodded and moved alongside of him. Then he looked at George and Ringo just to make sure. I can do this the once, John rasped. He didn't even waste words saying, and that's all. The group, determined to make each note and each syllable stunning, nodded. They had his back. Twist and shout, one take, Norman Smith played with words, hinting at success. John inhaled, waited a moment, and then exhale. Well, shake it up, baby, now. Twist and shout. It roared out of him, energetic, suggestive, and raw. Twist and shout had never sounded like this when Phil Medley and Burt Russell had penned it. It had never been this gritty when the Isley Brothers took it to the hit parade. It had only existed as a calypso number and later as a lighthearted dance tune. Happy-go-lucky. But under John Lennon's purview, the song was a proposal. It was a proposition. It was an eye-to-eye, no-holds-barred invitation to a lot more than dance. And the gruff voice that served it up made no apologies for his earthly advances. You got me going just like I knew you would, John screamed, feeling the blood running down his throat. Brian Epstein's eyes were wide and full of hope. George Martin barely dared to breathe, wishing the boy triumph. Norman Smith boosted the mics to the max, praying that the boys would make it all the way through. Paul and George were doing their best, oohs and ahs. They were perfect. Their responses to John's call were without flaw, their enthusiasm untamed, and their harmony strong. It was the best night in the Kaiser Keller. It was the happiest night in the cavern. It was the last song of the evening at the new Brighton Tower Ballroom. It was all a show could be and more. Paul's bass line mirrored George's lead, dodge for dodge, and Ringo's sturdy Mersey drumming fearlessly hammered Studio 2. As the lights began to go brighter, John Lennon screamed, "Come on, come on!" And the studio's soft yellow glow revealed his leering visage, a face far from blameless or naive. John swaggered. George Martin had dreamed of producing an LP that would let the rest of England and possibly the world someday know what these four unusual Liverpool boys were like. He had wanted to capture them in their heat and sweat-soaked cavern below the ground. But that eventuality barred, this was the sound he had hoped to elicit. This unvarnished, uncensored magic that made Brian Epstein's group something special. Something special, George Martin shook his head. Even to him, the phrase sounded trite and silly. It was a sentiment on a birthday card, an anniversary greeting. But listening to the boys build their "I'll do you one better" eyes up the scale to John's rock and roll scream, there was no other way to describe them. They were something special. Someday the world would know, and the world would remember. In one take was Twist and Shout.
And that was the song that was unbelievable, and he did it. And believe me, that sums up Please Please Me, doesn't it? What a great episode, part 1, part 2 of Please Please Me. It fascinated me, Jude.
It's just, what group today would go in and make a record on an LP on one day, sick, worn out, tired. They've been on tour. They're going back on tour the next day. And yet they cut a magical record in one day. Amazing, amazing.
Jude, now we're going to continue with what we're doing with the albums, so I can't wait for the next one. We'll keep that our surprise. But I got to tell you, the Please Please Me album, out of all the albums, it's just me. But it's just my favorite album. If you told me which one is your favorite, me, it's this. And you know why it's my favorite album? Because it captures the Beatles that no one knows them, the excitement of the period. They recorded in 63, and even because of the album, 64 was all mania, and there's nothing like it. If you sit in your house and you even put the record on, this Australian version I got is very heavy vinyl, and you turn up the speakers, you are listening to something like you've never heard before, because there's never been anything like that to that point in a recording. And so beautiful. You got your rock tracks, like Paul's starting off with 1, 2, 3, 4. I saw us standing there. Then you got the love songs by John. Then you've got There's a Place, and you just sit there and listen to it. Do you want to know a secret? Another one, it's just got you straight away. All these tracks have got you, even like the one they wrote.
Yep. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, even the one they wrote, Misery, for her.
Yep.
And she wouldn't take it because of her.
She should have taken that song. She had a big hit with that song.
Yeah, exactly. She made a big mistake. But all I want to say is, Jude, thank you again. I can't wait for our next episode. We'll say goodbye to everyone, but do me a favor, just stay there for a moment. And thank you, everyone, for listening to Plastic EP. And thank you again, Jude.
Thank you. Happy Father's Day, everybody.
Same here. Happy Father's Day.